Hello, this is David Braun, and a few weeks ago I posted a video on LinkedIn that demonstrated the TLeaves, which is a valuation process that assists the appraiser or valuator in doing their work. And I had mentioned at that time that the TLeaves could be used as an engine for an appraisal, an evaluation. It could be a fourth approach to value. It could be a review tool. There's several uses for it. What we're looking at here is an evaluation that does not conform to USPAP. So let's run through this real quick. Okay, I will have already entered a file number, and then here's some fake information. The address, the city, the state, the zip code, the county, then who's the lender, who's the lender's agent, what's the lender's ID for this particular assignment, who's the borrower, and then there'll be a service fee, and hopefully it would be greater than 0. And here's a billing date. And then you can click on these little boxes. You have to click off to click back on, and it checks them. This does not conform to USPAP, so it's important that the client is a federally regulated lender. If it's not a federally regulated lender and you're a licensed appraiser and has been granted the right to do these evals outside of USPAP, you can't do them for anyone except a federally regulated lender, or it's not an eval. So you want to make sure of that every time. Tax records. Now we're getting into some of the requirements for the federal requirements for a evaluation. Where does the data come from? So in this case, it came from tax records. I could have put it was current MLS, but it's not. But I did find a previous MLS. And then I also interviewed, and we'll change this, say, to the sales agent or whatever you'd like to put. Now, here, this is the inventory method, and gosh, in a book I did on scope of work back, I think in 2003 or 2004, I talked about that appraisers really don't inspect. We inventory, we count the nuts and bolts just like at the hardware store, but we don't screw the bolt onto the nut to see if they work. So the inventory method here is curbside, and when you mark this, I'm going to go to some of the paperwork at the end, the assumptions, limiting conditions. I include those even in evals. It says here, a portion of the data gathering process was based on an inventory of the subject properties components as observed from the curbside. Now, if I had marked it was a desktop, then you see automatically it changes that. We're largely based on desktop research. So that changes as you go. So we really don't ever have to touch the certifications once we go through this. Okay, comparable data source MLS. I'm doing something here in closing costs. If I clicked here for closing costs, it would allow a line item on the data grid for the comparables, and it would show maybe what the concessions were. Normally, seller concessions have to be mentioned in or because of the definition of market value, which is pretty much the same for an eval as it is an appraisal. And the typical seller concession is closing costs. And on this property, I know, because I'm also a realtor, by the way, I broker a small office, and I know there's most of the time there is about a 3% of closing costs. So in my MLS, where I'm kind of struggling with this, my MLS is a huge MLS, and they hold that realtors must treat this as confidential information. So they don't list it in their MLS. And if you call the sales agents or the listing agents in this case, they've been schooled that that's confidential information and they can't give it out. And so the only way we can get this information then would be to call the buyer or the seller, which I don't have their numbers and don't know how to get hold of them. And even if I did, they wouldn't know who I was. They wouldn't want to give this information. But I'm caught in this situation where I don't have the information, and I wanted to mention that some evaluators would say, okay, I don't have the information, I'll just say 0. But I know that this kind of thing is paid, so I'm going to mark here that they are estimated, and I believe about 80% of the time, about 3% of closing costs is paid. So I'm going to get some closing costs in here based on my knowledge of the market. Because remember, this TLeaves is assisting me. I'm not assisting it. So I'm going to instruct it to take something off the value. And the sales are entered right now, but if you didn't have the sales entered, you wouldn't know this amount, the average of the sales, until you put them in. And then I do want to number the pages. And now let's move on. We can see here then that's going to automatically build our invoice. Then we have a title page. It's a little bit bare because we don't have our pictures in. So I'm going to click here to load pictures. And so it put the front of the property in. And then it has a photo sheet. This will take up to 12 photos. And the way to come in automatically, they have to be in a subfolder called photos, and they're numbered 1 through 12, and then they're positioned on here by their number. I always do the map and make it big like this for photo number 2. So anyway, the photos are in. This would be for additional photos, but we only had 5, so let's get that out of our way. Then the subject information. Here's a sheet on the subject property that would be filled out. And some things I may not want to put in or don't feel like this particular lender cares about that. And you can look at this. I'm not going to go over all of these, but you can read over this yourself. You'll notice here that these are like one line. These automatically expand. This would go as big as you want them to go. So these expanded out. And once I put everything that I want it to do on this, then there's some rows I didn't use. See, I didn't use rooms, and I didn't use these comments. So what I do at the end is I close the rows I didn't use. Okay, so they're done. Now, this is the data sheet here, and it shows the data of the subject. This is the data value, and then we have the location, site, quality, pretty much, you know, most of the things that's on secondary market forms, kind of the secondary market model. And it's got the square footages, and it's got the information for each comp. I happen to have these just in by the highest to the lowest. Okay, so once these are in, then I'm just going to load the information into the TLeaves. Now the TLeaves is going to need me to tell it what I think about the market condition rate. And we have pretty good market condition rate. I'm going to put from 2 to 8%. And it doesn't need any other information. Then I'm going to run this. Some of that data was left in. Some of that data was left in from an earlier run. Now, while this is running, let me mention why I chose 5 comparables. One, it's often hard to find more than 5 comparables if it's, you know, a market where sales are limited or even listings are limited. And even if you could get, say, 10 comps, at this stage of the game, we don't have databases loaded with quality and condition. So if you bring in 5 additional comps, you've got to pull those up usually in the MLS and look at the photos to try to get a handle on, is the garage in the basement? Is it up top? Is it brick all the way around the house? What's the quality and what's the condition? So you could, if you add 5 more comps, you could easily add an hour to this. And our goal is to get these done quickly. So now the analysis is complete. Now this is real data, so I can look here now as evaluator and know that the TLeaves thinks it's worth $136,000. Now it picked 5% for the interest rate, which I'm fine with that because I know it's a pretty hefty interest rate. Now I'm going to look, and I didn't close this. Let me go back to setup here real quick. I want to get this on full screen. I'm going to click that full screen so I can see stuff better. Okay, here we go. Now it says the model strength is weak, and you can look at that through the residual analysis and the MAPE, the mean absolute percentage error. So you got one that's 16% and one that's 14%. So it's saying, hey, this model is not predicting exactly like we would like. Now, the component similarity, and the components is everything except gross living area, is a 6 out of 7. Now, that's really good. If you have a 6 out of 7 or a 7 out of 7, I'm not sure if it can be far off. I've not seen it be far off in this case, so that's very good. What we don't want is for this to be a 1 or a 6, and this is not a 1 or a 6. It looks like maybe 2 tied for 3 or 2 tied for 5, so it put a 4.5 in. And the distance that the subject's computer rating for it from the average of the others is 16%. That's good. So, and here, this is the market condition rate error impact is a 0.6. And what that tells me is if this market condition rate that it used of a positive 5% is wrong 1%, it would affect the model overall. It would make your answer be 0.6% off. So that's nice to know sometimes. And basically, if your comps are all within 2 months, it's going to be low. If your comps are all 2 years, it's going to be a real high rate. So it lets you know how important this is. In this case, it's a little bit important. So overall, it says, hey, this is really just fair. And then it's got our seller concessions down here of the minus 3,500 that we talked about. So it's 136 minus 3,500. So our answer would be 132.5 at this point. Now we've got to do our other checks, and I showed this in the other video, but you can read about the chart analysis here. And we see the bubbles all look good. The subject is here in the center of the bubbles. The two lines, they're not right on top of each other, but they're pretty close. So this is very good here. That's strong. We would like this to be 0.7. The R squared is 0.6. And remember, and a very high R squared tends to be good evidence that the prediction is going to be relatively accurate or reasonable. And however, if this were 0.4 or 0.3, that's not evidence that it's a bad, that it is a bad answer or a bad output. And I did a video on this some time ago, which you may be able to find. So let's see what else we've got. Then the last thing, the appraiser can try to rank the property. Now what this has done automatically for it, we've got the predicted prices. The computer went ahead at the application and ranked these for us, okay? This minus down here means that this is what it predicted for this particular sale is not in agreement with where it should be, because this was predicted to be about the third, looks like second or third. This was predicted to be the second. It's not too bad because these two are right together. But that just gives me a little warning. And why these are going to be off sometimes is, remember, if a property sold for $125,000 and it sold 6% too high, that's going to be $6,000. That's going to be maybe $7,000 off, and it's going to be out of kilter by $7,000. So, it's still hard to do, but mainly in this ranking, what we want to try to do is see if we agree with the ranking. And what we would do is compare these two. It made them almost the same, and you can go down through these ratings and see they're pretty close. Matter of fact, they're very close. So these should be close together, and they are. This one is not much better. It's only 6,000. All of these aren't much better till you jump way over here. So let's see if these are just a little bit better. You got a 2 and a 2. So both of these are better there. This one's better than this. Then you've got the square footage. We have a lot of square footage. This is comparable. The comp number. What are we? Comp number. Oh, it doesn't show it. There's North Avenue. It's similar in size. And then, so I don't disagree. We have a garage. And so these all look decent to me. So I wouldn't hesitate to use this. So I'm going to go back to the worksheet, and I'm going to say, I'm going to kind of agree with it. I'm going to do the 132.5. And the final value, I'm going to round it to 133,000. You might round to the nearest 5,000. And we have that. Then to put our report together, I would probably start with the invoice and take the title sheet, take the photos, the subject information, the comps, the worksheet, the rank, and the scope of work. Now I need to hit escape, and I need to go to File, Save As is the way I do this, and I would change this to a .pdf, and I would say Save, and now it's going to make my report that I would deliver to my client. And while this is running, let's talk about this. So what's the advantage of something like a valuation process that assists the appraiser? Well, number one, it's faster. You saw it went pretty good. Now, it won't go that good every time. Sometimes you'll decide it's very weak, the output, and there's not much evidence. Matter of fact, there's evidence that it may not be reliable. And then you have to replace a sale and run it again. Okay, so it's not always going to be this fast. The other thing is, two appraisers with the same information are going to be fairly consistent. And that's going to help us in something that's new that we're faced with. And that is the concern that appraisers and valuators may have an unconscious racial bias. And if someone accuses you of that, then at least most of your analysis, you can say, that's out of my hands. And then you would get back to the comps you used and the way they were rated. And it would be more specific. And probably no one could attack you unless, this does just assist you. So you can make the valuation be higher if you work at it. Unfortunately, an appraiser could still manipulate the TLeaves, but by and large, you would say, my analysis can't be biased because I used TLeaves. And then what we would say is, now let's take a look at the sales I used and how the sales were rated compared to the subject. Now this is the way the report would look then. So we've got our invoice, we've got our photo and our title sheet, and we've got our map and some photos. This was a drive-by, remember, so we don't have a lot of photos. We have information on our subject property. Then we have our subject and comparable data, and it shows how they were all rated. And as the appraiser, you have to gather the data. This is part of what the appraiser does. As the appraiser or valuator, because if you're doing an evaluation outside of USPAP, you're not an appraiser, you are an evaluator. So, or I'll put them both under the heading of valuator. So this is where you would pick your comparables and rate them. Until we get a database that has the ratings in for us, we have to do this part ourselves. And this is partly what differentiates this from a true AVM, and why it should be more accurate. An AVM, no human picks the comps and rates them like this. So this is an entirely different animal. It's not really this is not really, I don't like the term appraiser assisted AVM, because this assists the appraiser, number one. Number two, it's not a traditional AVM. So we have our data, then this shows our output so that someone could follow along with what we did. And there's a confirmation here that says we went and reviewed these outputs, and we analyzed the bubble chart, and we analyzed the R squared, and we also looked at the ranking. And then we have our sheets at the end, and that's basically how the TLeaves would work with an evaluation. And basically then, this could work also with an appraisal, mainly if it's a restricted report appraisal. Basically, I would have to change the certifications, because these have to do with evaluation. I would change the certifications, and I'd probably put a little bit more in for the highest and best use. But basically, this could actually be what's done for an appraisal. So I think I had see if I can find it on the first page on setup. Here's my contact if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.